Welcome to Backyard Cigars. So glad that you could join me once again. I'm going to take you back in time. It's 1905. Perfecto Garcia has arrived in Ybor City from Cuba. His firm consists of three brothers who are in Chicago, manning the 15 cigar shops that they have there. Angel, Jose, y Manuel are in Chicago. There was one other brother. He returned to Spain. Angel Manuel Jose, or Angel Jose Manuel, that could be one person's name in Puerto Rico or any other part of Latin America. Actually, that'd be the short version. Now, they were using tobacco from their family farms in Cuba, and blending it also with Cuban tobacco that they were buying from the Oliva family cigar tobacco company, which we've heard of. And they were doing quite well in 1905 at their startup stage. They were experienced, they knew what they were doing. It wasn't as if they were starting from scratch. They had farms in Cuba. But then tragedy struck. In 1908, the Great Fire of Ybor City ripped through 18 square blocks. It burned 174 homes and 42 businesses. Among them was the small wooden structure factory that the Perfecto Garcia brothers were using. So, left without a factory, they turned to Sanchez y Haya, and Sanchez y Haya allowed them to use their factory in the meantime while their new one was getting built. And that that Haya may be in relation to, and I'm not sure, to the original founders of Ybor City, Vicente Ybor and Ignacio Haya. I'm not exactly sure if that factory is in connection to that original founder of Ybor City. But in 1914, the new factory for the Perfecto Garcia and Brothers Cigar Company was established. And that factory was on North 16th Street. It's actually still there. It was abandoned for a long time, but there have been a lot of plans for it. I will attach some information regarding that abandoned factory / warehouse. 1917, some reports say that is when the structure was completed. And at that point, they began doing business in the new warehouse. Now, in 1916, right before the official completion of their factory, which they were already in, it was pretty much set up by 1914, 1915, right? There was a strike, and it originated in the Perfecto Garcia's factory. And this strike was looming. There weren't many demands being met yet, but eventually it was resolved. Eventually. And then in 1920, you had another strike. This one, they said, was a little bit more disruptive. And in this case, by 1921, I think it was resolved. But by 1924, there was a court case. And in that court case, it states that Jose Garcia of the Perfecto Garcia and Brothers Cigar Company had violated some rules. You see, what had happened was that certain association, a particular association, the Cigar Association of Manufacturers, had set up and had basically gone to a lot of the cigar manufacturer cigar companies and said, listen, you have to join this association or you're not getting any cigar boxes. And things like that developed. Well, people started to have to make a choice. Are we going to join this association or are we not? Because if we join this association, we can get our cigar boxes. And if we don't, then we will have a disruption in business. And that's exactly what happened. Some people even folded for a while because they couldn't get cigar boxes. But the Garcia company, they joined the association and they got their cigar boxes. Now, Jose Garcia was questioned because during that 1920 strike, he refused to close the factory. That's right, didn't close the factory, and that created a problem because he violated a lot of the main rule, one of the main rules, under their agreement. So they expelled him, and that was the end for him. They had to find another way to get cigar boxes because it was problematic for them. They had been expelled. It was quite the thing. In the courts, it was quite the thing. Now, they continued to prosper after that. In the 40s, by the way, by the 1940s, Perfecto Garcia had already passed. He died young. He died in 1930. He was about 60 years old. That's fair to say, and I'm not 100% sure that his brothers lived a little longer and may have gone past into the 40s and 50s, possibly. I don't know how much younger they were than he, but Angel Jose and Manuel were in charge of the company long after Perfecto had passed. Now, in 1947, when the war had ended, it was a bit of a pickle because the United States government wanted to return millions of cigars that it had stockpiled. And some they were able to return. They were old and dried up, poor conditions. The Perfecto Garcia cigar company actually ended up incinerating close to 600,000 cigars in 1947 because, well, it was part of protecting the brand reputation. Those cigars got out into the open market somehow. Well, people could start saying Perfecto Garcia is producing a bad quality product. You didn't want that, so you destroyed them. Now, at that point in time, by 1947, the Perfecto Garcia and brothers, they had about 900 employees. But sales were starting to decline in the late 1940s. Going into the 1950s, you also had some more decline in sales. And, of course, by 1962, when the embargo hit, the Perfecto Garcia and Brothers Cigar Company were resting on their laurels. They had a certain amount of Cuban tobacco left. They couldn't import any more of their tobacco from the Cuban farms because they had been nationalized. And so they had to make a decision. What are we going to do? Well, by 1947, by 1945, actually, a lot of companies had already resorted to machine-made cigars. I'm not 100% sure if this is a machine-made cigar or if it's an actual handmade cigar, but this cigar dates back to 1960 to 1962. One of the last vintage cigars that I was able to purchase from cigar.com before their inventory dried up. They had a variety of options at one point. I believe this was the last one that I was able to purchase, and I think it cost me about between $25 and $35. And that was several years ago. And it's been in the humidor about 64, 65 RH. And this is the Perfecto Garcia's Cedros number 2 Clear Havana. We're going to take a closer look at this cigar. It looks to be about 6.5 inches. Ring gauge is probably going to be about a 42. A Panatela style Vitola. I don't know what the wrapper and the binder are. If it was a homogenized leaf, there's a good chance that there isn't a binder, but there were still instances where certain companies did include a binder just to give it that handmade feel. And of course, the filler is Cuban, pre-embargo. And this is from the remaining stock that the Perfecto Garcia and Brothers Cigar Company had. Now, let's see if you can see that the cellophane is quite yellow, but not ridiculously yellow or amber. So we're just going to take that off. And this has been perfectly preserved, I have to say. Because it's been in the cellophane and it was so neat in the cellophane, so neatly packed in the cellophane, it looked like it had not been removed at all from this cellophane. And because it's covered in the Cedros, the cedar sheath, I'm going to say that this is probably not going to be a cigar that I'm going to give it the water rinse. As you can see the color of this cigar, now I'm going to take this Cedros off. Some of you might try to tell me that I should use this to light my cigar. And because it has no tape that I can see, I may just. You have it here. I'm going to hold. So the cedar sheath is actually slightly attached to the band. The band is very loose at this point. I'm going to tell you that right now. Very loose. But I'm going to take this sheath off. And I want you to look at this cigar. It literally looks like a Candela cigar. If I didn't know any better, I would say this is a Candela cigar. From what the age, the 53 years to be exact, has done to this cigar. And I just, it has a very fine sandpaper like texture or feel to the wrapper. I actually feel it kind of sticking to my fingers. Let's see if you can bring up the band even closer so that you can see. Okay. Here, using the sheet to light this. This isn't always the best idea, folks. Okay, it isn't always. Okay. It's a romantic idea to do that with the cedar sheath. In this case, the cedar sheath was very old, and it just didn't light the way that I would have wanted it. It's not a spill either way, right? So that aside, I'm gonna tell you why I'm really excited right now, because this is what smoking vintage cigars is all about. It's about tasting the past. It's about going back in time. It's about setting your expectations as well, because you're not smoking a New World cigar. You're not smoking a current production Cuban cigar. You're not smoking an exotic tobacco. You're smoking history. And I know that seems silly to say that, but you literally are. Perfecto Garcia, they hung out and stuck it out as long as they could. They operated until sometime in the 1970s. I'm not exactly sure when they ran out of their Cuban tobacco, but it's estimated that it ran out sometime in the 60s, maybe the late 60s. This particular cigar is dated from 1960 to 1962. This is probably one of the last examples of their treasure trove of Cuban tobacco from the Garcia farms in Cuba that they kept in a basement in Ybor City. Okay, and in this basement, I can just imagine they'd go down every day and they'd say, how much do we have left? Okay, we've got how many bales? How many cigars do you think we can make? Okay, we've got X amount of cigars, bales left from the Oliva family tobacco. When we run out, what are we gonna do? What are we gonna use to make our famous cigars? And I can imagine the conversation. Well, you know, I hear that so-and-so made a trip to the Canary Islands, and they're growing some good stuff out there, or they're talking about growing some good stuff out there. I don't know. I heard so-and-so went to Nicaragua. Check out, what they had to offer. Oh, well, I heard so-and-so was in Honduras, not too far away from Nicaragua. Stone's throw, depending on where you're at. I heard some good things about the soil there, too. Well, now it's 1963, 64. The embargo happened in February of 62. And you're down to like maybe your last bales, if that. And then you start to say, we've got to get creative here. We've got to really find out what we're going to do. And like I said, they hung on for a while, but eventually things just went downhill. and they sold the company to Havana Tobacco Company, I believe it is. And then the Havana Cigar Company bought them out. And then in 81, you had U.S. Tobacco from Connecticut buy the brand name from Havana Cigar Company, and they had the rights to distribute. Just a year later, in 82, U.S. Tobacco Company decided that they were going to move to PA, and they were going to cease operations of the making of Perfecto Garcia cigars. By 1999, Arango Cigar Company, or subsidiary of some sort, purchased the brand and started making the cigars out of Nicaragua. And nowadays, the cigars are still made using, I think, either Nicaraguan and Honduran tobacco, but they're not as famous anymore. They don't carry that kind of clout, if you might say. Perhaps in their current state, they're a good yard guard cigar. Couldn't say. Haven't had them. Look at this fine ash on this cigar. Perfect. I didn't do the hydration trick, remember. But what am I tasting? I tell you what I'm not tasting. I am not tasting cardboard. No siree. No ma'am. Not tasting cardboard. Which is something that we sometimes taste when we're experiencing a vintage cigar. Mustiness. Lack of any original flavors. And cardboard. Good old cardboard. Right? Not cardboard here. What I'm getting is a light cream. A very light cream. It's a smoothness in a light cream. Ooh, it's so smooth and creamy. I'm enjoying this. This is from that treasure trove in that famous factory where they kept this famous Cuban tobacco in bales up to the embargo a few years after the embargo, just making as many cigars as they could from what they had left. And a lot of folks were in the same predicament, right? They had a certain supply. Certain folks didn't have farms in Cuba, but they did. And they had a good stockpile, but they didn't have enough to carry them through the next decade or two. That was impossible. I say, this very well could have been a Candela cigar from the way it looks. But it wasn't a Candela cigar, but it sure looks like it at this point in time. Very mild. Super duper mild, okay? Super duper mild, inoffensive in any way. Very light cream. Just a hint of sweetness. Just a hint. What's missing here? What's missing is a ton of flavor. There's just no doubt about that. This isn't anywhere near close to what this cigar tasted like 53 years ago. I'm absolutely positive of that. But despite that, you're still getting a sense of high quality tobacco. You are, because number one, there isn't any cardboard effect going on here. That's a plus already from the get. Burn line construction still looks good. Nothing's cracking. The aroma is good. It's a light aroma, but it's a nice aroma. Something like a sweet aroma in the air. Again, today another windy day. 15 mile per hour winds, but despite that, I'm still picking up a good amount of the aroma. in a retrohale, you get traces like a light, salty, faint note. That's about as much as you're going to pick up in flavor in this particular vintage cigar. You might say, Jose, you paid $25, $35 for a cigar that has basically no flavor other than faint traces of sweetness and salt and a light, airy creaminess. That's it. Very mild. Nothing to really talk about other than the history you mentioned. And you might be half right. But there's another side to it. There are a lot of people that collect vintage items of all different sorts. And in a lot of cases, they don't even use these vintage items. They just want them either for nostalgic reasons, sentimental reasons, or simply just to look at them because they find them to be cool. Sometimes they are used as props or decoration. And I get that. That's fine. Well, I collect vintage cigars to smoke them. That's right. I collect them and I like to look at them. But ultimately, I'm going to put them to use. And that's a little bit more than what a vintage buyer of different items is doing when he's buying something and he's just leaving it there and he's not looking at it and it's not being useful for anything. This, at least, is a little useful here because I'm smoking it, I'm sharing this with you. We're going down, tracing the history of this cigar company, the mystical Cuban tobacco that they would send over to Ybor City from Cuba. And even if we're not getting a full understanding of just how good this Cuban tobacco was, we're able to say, we tried it. And that's more than the next fellow or Miss can say. With the smaller ring gauge, there is obviously the temptation, especially being so mild, to continue to smoke it at a rapid pace. But I've been mindful because I really do want to appreciate it to the fullest. So, you can enjoy it to the fullest as well. As I'm heading down to the stretch, I'm getting a little bit more of a cedar wood note in the finish. Yeah, it's cedar. And of course, one might say, well, for 53 years it was covered in a cedar sheath. So that might have played a role in what you're tasting. I wouldn't disagree. Light traces of a spice in the finish now. It's not totally devoid of flavor. It isn't. I'm sorry if I made that seem as if that was the case. But it obviously has lost a lot of that flavorful character that it had when it was fresh. And that's to be expected sometimes, but not always. Yeah, it's giving me more now. And I'm going to soak that in and come back to you with my final notes. I'll tell you something. Final third. And this isn't the total sum up. I know I said I was coming back with the total sum up, but I couldn't because I had to stop and tell myself, what are you really experiencing right now, Jose? What can you really share with the people that are watching this video? And one thing that I can say is that there is an element of surprise in smoking vintage cigars. Now, everybody knows that I get my vintage cigars now from the vintagecigarstore.com. But I go there because I'm gonna get guaranteed good quality cigars. No, not all of them are prized and sought after. Some of them are just historical pieces. Some of them will offer a good amount of satisfaction. Some may not offer the satisfaction that you're looking for, depending on your profile taste. But I can tell you right now that this cigar is it's just come to life. I don't know. It's been resuscitated somehow. And that's not to say that the first and second, third, it was dead. It wasn't. But it was a shell of itself, let's just say, in a very non-negative way. The cream has increased. Traces of spice and a little bit of pepper have increased in the finish. There's a tad musty note. It's a musty note combined with the creaminess that kind of balances itself out. How? I don't know. Science, I guess. The aroma, the smoke in the air is much more dense. The aroma itself has picked up a notch. I get a lot more of, you get that natural tobacco aroma. There's a teeny bit of sweetness that pops its head open every now and then, or pops its head up every now and then. There that was. In that puff, I got a good trace of a salty flavor in the finish. Along for the ride was the cream and the light spice. And it was just really nice. It really was. I'm going to stop. I got to stop because, Manatela type. I got to let it rest a little bit. And I promise this time I will come back with the complete summary. Summing it all up, the final third was really, for me, the moment I relished the most, the moment that I realized that I was actually starting to get a lot of flavor, and the developing spice and traces of pepper and salt, along with just a hint of sweetness and a creaminess that upticked, as well as with the aroma. And it just started to come together. It's just a shame that it happened towards the final third, but I'll take that over nothing, So I am smoking it to the nubbity nub. And it's delicious right now. I mean, even the finish is a little longer now. So there you have it. Thank you for watching Perfecto Garcia's and brother, Perfecto Garcia and Brothers Cigar Company, introducing the Cedros number 2, Clear Havana. Thank you so much again, ladies and gentlemen. Until next time on Backyard Cigars.